Hi guys, it's Tanker Fox. Doing something a little different today than my usual Fort Clinch content. I'm here at the Smithsonian National Museum of American History, and so we're gonna be, because I'm a military history YouTuber, we're gonna be checking out the exhibit, The Price of Freedom, Americans at War. It's really hard to show you the sign on camera. So we actually are starting off before America with the French and Indian War, which is, fun fact, just one of the many theaters of the greater 7 Years' War. Let's see, some weapons including a powder horn, English sword, a French halberd. You can see a waistcoat worn by one of the British-sided units. Specifically, you can see by the plaque there, Lieutenant Colonel Adam Stephen of the Virginia Regiment, and the gorget is the symbol of rank, which would be common in many European armies at the time and down the line in history. There's also a flintlock musket, which is pretty cool. Alright, on to some other stuff. This is cool. This is a British uniform. The British Army was most likely the earliest army to have what is known as the Standard Army, based off of Oliver Cromwell's New Model Army during the English Civil War, which is when they adopted the red coats, as early as 1645. I don't know when this was. Well, this is a recreation of the 29th Regiment of Foot that was involved in the Boston Massacre. So we're moving into the Age of Revolution. So this is the exhibit on the American Revolution. There you can see a map of the Northern Campaign up around New York. And over here actually is George Washington's uniform from the war. There's also a little section on the road to it and the lead up on how Americans felt about it. And over here is it's a recreation of the Battle of Lexington and Concord on film, and some muskets that might have been actually used. I don't know if they're originals or reproductions, but they're really cool. And here's some stuff from the campaign in the South, and some back where they use the backcountry, and ambush tactics were more common. Generals involved in the stuff were Nathaniel Greene and Banasher Tarleton. Here to be uniforms. Who used what equipment? Like, this is what a British seaman would use. Hessian troops. They were troops from Germany that were involved on the British side. And then you have your British regulars. This specifically would be the Grenadiers. And these are from the Continental troops and their French allies. There was a lot more than British and Patriots fighting in this war. There were Hessians, there were French, there were native tribes as well. This is a cannon. And this is what appears to be Yorktown, which is the battle that practically ended the war. I'll have a video of that out soon. And on top of that, there was also a sea war that involved privateers, which are pirates that are basically contracted by the government. And that is John Paul Jones that defeated a British ship, the Serapis, and after his ship, the Bonhomme Richard, was being taken out, they asked if he would surrender, and he said, I have not yet begun to fight." That quote's right there. I can't read today. And he is actually buried in the crypt under the Naval Academy Chapel in Annapolis. Pretty cool. And this is the turtle That's the first ever submarine used to lay mines on a British hull. The hull of a British ship, I'm sorry. It was successful, but it had to come up early because he ran out of air. It could only remain submerged according to that plaque for 30 minutes. And now, after the war is won, we're moving into a new era of expansion. What some would say is manifest destiny. This is some stuff used by Andrew Jackson during the War of 1812, which is where we got our national flag and the Star Spangled, and the poem that eventually led to our national anthem. And so this is just on some of the stuff from the other wars of expansion, including the Texas Revolution, which is where the Battle of the Alamo was one of the important battles there. Then some stuff from the Mexican-American War, which was probably one of our most important wars when it came to expansion, as it got us a lot of the territories in the West from the Spanish that we know now. It was a complicated war, and actually a lot of generals, or future Civil War generals, such as, it's hard to see in the light, but Robert E. Lee and Ulysses S. Grant fought there. We went to war with... One important point of why we fought the war was over disputes whether Texas became a state in 1845, and it was over dispute whether Texas is still a Mexican claim, as the Mexican side wanted, or if it's ours, as the American side wanted. So it's pretty interesting. And then many Indian wars that Andrew Jackson is believed may have started. Moving on to the Civil War, we have a lot of stuff. This is what I depict at Fort Clinch. This is some weaponry and equipment used by the Confederates. They had the kepi type hats. You see new weapons like the percussion cap rifle and the rifle musket. You're actually starting to rifle weapons, and that's why the line infantry tactics that we used during the war were very nasty and effective, because the accuracy of the newer projectiles combined with the old just made the lines a bigger target. And so this is actually some of the Union stuff. This is a New York Zouave. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right at all. But at the start of the war, everyone had all these different units, different uniforms. This was heavily inspired by the French. And so this was one of many Union uniforms that was worn by volunteers from different states at the start of the war. This was worn by a unit from New York. And then these are some of the Union equipment. Obviously, at the start of the war, Confederates were very gray, and then the Union was blue, almost oppression-inspired blue, which may or may not be the explanation behind it, but it's interesting. But actually, as the war went on, the South running out of supplies because the Anaconda Plan was attempting to squeeze them into submission, basically, and cut off all their trade and access to things. They became like a lighter color brown called butternut because homemade dyes were being used to produce the uniforms. There's some weapons. This is a model of the Minay ball, which is the new projectile for rifled weapons. And then you can see lever actions and revolvers, a step up from the muskets we've seen before. And this is some stuff on Civil War medicine, which is an interesting topic, because they did have. And this is some stuff from specific battles, like these are items from Gettysburg, Vicksburg. That's a model of a ship. The the USS Carondelet, and I think it was part of a Vicksburg was a combined operation between the Army and the Navy to capture strongholds near the Mississippi River, and the Union victory here effectively cut the Confederacy off from the Mississippi and split it in half between the western part and the more eastern part, which was really important for the Union winning the war, despite loads of early Southern victories, as this display talks about. Yeah. And then this is another branch of part of it, where in the same year we fought in the Philippines and defeated Spain. And then we immediately took them over. And we started expanding more and more into the Pacific over the 1890s and into the 20s. And then this is when we're really joining foreign wars. This is stuff from the First World War. These are different weapons that were used. This is a Vickers machine gun, German stick grenade, which would become famous in both World Wars. Artillery shell, the British Lewis gun, and some propaganda posters. That one's my favorite. That says, "Treat 'em tough, join the tanks." That is Sergeant Stubby. He was a dog that snuck into the army with some troops, and he stayed around because of his habit of saluting officers. I don't know if that was who trained him to do that or if he just picked it up, but he ended up becoming really useful, warning troops and even nearby towns of gas. He was wounded twice by grenades and once by gas, and so his handlers ended up making him his own little gas mask. That looked like that's a similar. Speaking of gas masks, that's what would have been worn by an American doughboy. They have the American M1917 helmet, which is the American make of the British Brodie helmet. I don't know the exact model of gas mask, but it's similar to the British smallpox respirator. Now we move into World War II, which is America's second deadliest war behind the Civil War. Over here is some propaganda that was to improve morale. It had various topics, like someone talked, so don't talk about the wars, or else a spy will hear it. Rationing, which was important. Recruitment posters, and to buy war bonds to give the government money for the war. Not just recruiting posters for the military. Well, I mean, yeah, technically the military, but women also joined in, like, the different units, like the Women's Army Corps, and all sorts of auxiliary units. Cartoons were very funny. Cartoons were a common part. This is
the Air Force gets the glory and the Navy gets the cheers.
This is actually a training film series called Private Snafu, about what not to do in combat that was used to train soldiers. This is a wing on production, which is really interesting. And then this is the D-Day, which was part of Operation Overlord. What D-Day means is basically the day when things happen, the start of a major operation. And so us, along with British and Canadian troops, landed on several beaches throughout Normandy. Our beaches were Utah and Omaha. Omaha is the famous one. And the British landed at Gold and Sword, and the Canadians landed at Juno. This is an M1 helmet nicknamed the Steel Pot that was issued during the Second World War and was used for a major part of American military history. And then this is some stuff from the Pacific Campaign, where we were fighting the Japanese. That's, I believe, is an M2 flamethrower, and M18 Browning automatic rifle. That's a mortar, and then that's an M1 Tommy gun. And then another M1 helmet, this time with a marine camouflage cover. This was a pretty major part. This is some stuff from, I believe, the Battle of the Bulge, which is when we advanced further onto Europe, which would have been a coat and mittens and a hood worn by American troops at the time. These were actually items carried by American prisoners of war that they hid things in to aid in escape. And this is the captured Berlin when the Soviets reached it first. In fact, the soldier in this picture actually was wearing a watch, but for some reason the Soviets edited the watch out. And this is some of the Allied bombings of Germany using B-24s, B-17s. They bombed key places like Dresden, Berlin, and other places throughout Germany. We actually firebombed Dresden, like we did with Tokyo. More stuff from the fight for France, including Americans' equipment, including another field phone, M1 Garand, and some other. And this is some German equipment, including a Walther P-38, which was issued during the latter half of the war. Pretty interesting stuff. This is a recreation of American barracks, I think on some inspection day, because they have their stuff all laid out, various uniforms, stuff in the foot locker. You can see personal items they might have carried, as well as the Army equipment and some of their combat and maybe possibly dressing. This is some equipment used by the U.S. Navy. They were very important because, again, the Atlantic and Pacific fronts, we had to get there by ship, by troop ships, and especially in the Atlantic when we were shipping things to our allies, there were German U-boats everywhere, and so they had traveled in massive convoys with cargo ships. And this is a picture of some crew in a German U-boat. We were also involved. This is some stuff from Africa, including a American tanker's helmet, and one bazooka, which is one of many anti-tank weapons used during the war, and a charge for it, as well as a German sun hat from the Afrika Korps. And then this is an M3 grease gun and some other equipment from the Italian campaign of 1943, where after we took North Africa, we landed in Sicily, and for the next 2 years fought in Italy on our way up into Germany. This is a Willys Jeep. This is one of the most iconic American vehicles of the Second World War. It was primarily, I believe, used for recon in some armored divisions, as well as for carrying like important people such as officers and whatnot throughout the front. Now we are moving into the Cold War, which was not actually one could say it's a major war of American history, but was actually not really fought. Well, kind of was fought through battles, primarily small proxy wars, because an actual hot war would have involved the use of nuclear weapons. That's when things began to heat up with them. More and more of them were developed in an arms race against the Soviet Union. And so this is when we get the Korean War, which I'm in a gallery for right now, and the Vietnam War and other proxy wars that were fought to try to limit, at least on the American perspective, it was fought to try and limit the spread of communism. So this display case has two uniforms from the Korean War. On the left is the hot weather uniform, and on the right is the cold weather uniform. Both were worn during the war, both are originals. And in the center is an M1 Garand. This, like the M1 steel plate helmet and a lot of other equipment and vehicles during the Korean War, is a carryover from World War II. It's pretty interesting. So this right here is a map of the Korean Peninsula during the Korean War. You can see a lot of things like some major battles, the 38th parallel where Korea was originally divided, the truce line, the capitals of both halves of Korea, and the extent of some counterattacks during the war. It's pretty cool. It's interesting to see the scale and how far the armies were able to go into each other's territory and how quickly the war had turned. Really interesting. Also, Pork Chop Hill is a really cool name for a battle, in my opinion. Moving on to the Vietnam War Hall now. This is an American airborne uniform from the Vietnam War. It belonged to a man named Captain Redding, as indicated by the rank insignia and the name tape. You can tell it's an airborne uniform because of the dark red beret. The exact shade of red, I cannot remember for the life of me. I'm sorry. I'm recording this really late. And also by the parachutist badges on the beret and on the tunic. You can also see it's in a camouflage pattern. I can't recognize the exact type of camouflage at this time, but if you can, leave it in the comments. I'd like to learn more. But yeah, this is when we start shifting from drab uniforms like we saw in the Korean War and World War II displays that I pointed out earlier, and we start doing more and more things with camouflage, especially in a jungle environment. Yeah. That's kind of it for this one. So this here is a Bell UH-1 Huey. This is a really common helicopter during Vietnam War. Basically became a symbol of the whole war. It was primarily used for troop transport and medevac, which is what the mock-up here is supposed to display. Inside the helicopter, they're playing a little documentary about how medevacs worked, as demonstrated by the diorama it's basically set into. This is an actual helicopter that they have on display, and it's really cool. It was most likely used in the war, and yeah, the picture doesn't do it justice. So here is another display case with Vietnam War uniforms, again American. As you can see on the far left uniform, that helmet is, yep, you guessed it, the M1 again. It kept being issued throughout the past few wars, and so it's still really common at this point, although by this time it would have received an upgraded liner and upgraded chin strap and all that stuff. The far left uniform, I'd like to point out, also has the Alice model webbing, I believe, which was developed for this war. And I think that's pretty cool. In front of that black helmet is a pilot's helmet. I believe a helicopter pilot's helmet. And I just think that looks pretty sick. And then that machine gun, I believe, is an M60. But please correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, that's that. This display case has two uniforms from the other side of the Vietnam War. On the left is the Viet Cong, what they would have worn, and on the right is the National Vietnamese Army, or NVA, uniform. Between them is the AK-47. That rifle is a Soviet type, and it would have been used by both the VC and the NVA, as well as other Soviet and Chinese-issued equipment that was sent to them. An interesting little detail, the chest rig on the Viet Cong uniform you might recognize. It's the same Soviet-style chest rig that's present in many proxy wars throughout the whole of the Cold War. And you might recognize it from video games such as Escape from Tarkov or Stalker. So I thought that's a pretty cool little tidbit. And in front of them is booby traps that would have been placed in Viet Cong tunnel systems. They had very complex tunnel systems, and to protect them, they had a system of booby traps in place that were basically the bane of whatever unlucky American or South Vietnamese tunnel rats were tasked with infiltrating these complex tunnel systems. So this is post-Cold War, when we became more of a global superpower. This is the M85 and chocolate chip camouflage patterns. This is some rubble from September 11th and the attack on the World Trade Center. And this is when we started fighting what would be known as the War on Terror. And this is from the the war in Iraq. And this is a different camouflage pattern. That gold star flag over there, there was a similar one in the World War II exhibit. That means the family's serviceman was a KIA. There were 3 different color stars: the blue star, which means they were serving; the silver star, which means they were wounded; and then the gold star, which means they were KIA or MIA, killed in action. These are some more uniforms of a similar type. And yeah, that's kind of it. So that's basically it from the French and Indian War until the wars in the Middle East that are still really going on. It's been a major part of American military history, is a major part of American history. And so I believe it's important that we do study it. And so I like what the Smithsonian's done, and I like the artifacts they display and such. It's very cool. It's very interesting. Well, that's it for me then. Tanker Fox, out.